June 4, 1942, 9:18 a.m., 180 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. Altitude barely 100 feet above the Pacific. The wind screams past the open cockpits like a living thing. You can almost taste the salt on your lips, feel the cold spray stinging your eyes as the TBD Devastator skims the wavetops. The big radial engine vibrates through every rivet and rib, shaking the old torpedo bomber so hard your teeth rattle. Ensign George Gay, 23 years old but looking like he's aged a lifetime in the last hour, grips the control yoke with both hands, eyes locked on the horizon. In the rear seat, hunched over the radio and the single .30 caliber machine gun, sits 19-year-old aviation radioman third class Robert Huntington, Sparks to everyone who knew him back in Iowa. Just a kid, really, freckles still on his nose, hands that should be holding a baseball, not a gun. The 15 planes of Torpedo Squadron 8 had launched from the USS Hornet before dawn, no fighter cover. The Wildcats had been vectored to the wrong coordinates because of one more garbled radio call higher up the chain. It was just them now, slow, underpowered devastators carrying one Mark 13 torpedo each, flying straight into the teeth of the Japanese carrier strike force. Sparks's headset crackled again, static, fragments of a message from the Hornet. Something about abort or rejoin or maybe press home. The words blurred together in the roar of the engine and the howl of the wind. His fingers fumbled on the Morse key, heart slamming against his ribs. In that split second of panic and confusion, the 19-year-old made the mistake. He keyed the transmit button and shouted into the intercom, "Skipper, confirmed, attack order stands, full throttle." Gay didn't hesitate. He trusted his radio man. Every pilot did. He shoved the throttle forward. The Devastator lurched ahead, nose dipping even lower. The rest of the squadron followed, trusting the same broken message. 15 obsolete planes, 15 young men, committed now to a torpedo run against 4 Japanese carriers, protected by 40 Zeros and every gun the fleet could swing. You can feel the shift in the cockpit, the way the young radio man's stomach drops as the static clears too late and he realizes he may have just read the code wrong. But there is no time to call it back, no time to scream abort. The horizon is already filling with gray shapes, the carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. Their decks packed with fueled and armed planes, their bridges alive with officers who still believe they are invincible after Pearl Harbor. Then the Zeros come. They drop out of the sun like silver arrows, engines screaming. 20-millimeter cannons tear holes the size of fists through the Devastator's thin aluminum skin. One plane off Gay's starboard wing simply disappears in a fireball, pilot, radio man, and torpedo gone in a single orange bloom. Another spirals into the sea, trailing black smoke, its crew bailing out too low, parachutes never opening. The air fills with the chatter of machine guns and the sickening thud of cannon shells finding fuel tanks. Gay's plane takes 3 hits in quick succession. Sparks swings the gun around, firing short, desperate bursts at the flashing shapes above them. Empty brass casings tumble past his legs. "They're everywhere," he yells. A 7.7-millimeter round punches through the fuselage, inches from his head, filling the cockpit with the smell of burnt cordite and fear. Gay fights the controls, lining up the drop. Steady, steady. The carrier Kaga looms huge now, a steel city on the water. He releases the torpedo. It splashes clean and runs straight. But the Devastator is already dying. Another burst stitches across the wing. Fuel streams out. The engine coughs once, twice, then seizes. Gay yanks back on the yoke, trying to keep the nose up for one last second of glide. "Brace!" he shouts. The plane slams into the Pacific at 90 knots. The impact is like hitting concrete. Water explodes over the cockpit.
Sparks is slammed forward, his head cracking against the radio set. For one terrifying heartbeat, everything goes black and silent, except for the roar of bubbles and the groan of metal folding in on itself. When he surfaces, gasping, the Devastator is already sliding under the waves behind him. Gay is 10 yards away, life vest inflating, blood on his forehead but alive. The two men tread water in the middle of the Japanese fleet's defensive ring, the carriers burning in the distance from other torpedo hits that had actually run true. Sparks coughed seawater, eyes wide. He has no idea yet that his single misread radio call had kept Torpedo 8 committed just long enough, had put Gay's plane in the exact patch of ocean where the final distraction would matter most. High above, the Japanese Zeros are already wheeling back, pilots grinning behind their goggles. Easy targets now, 2 floating Americans, helpless, perfect sport. And in that moment, the sky directly above them, 20,000 feet of clear, uncontested blue, belongs to no one.
The water is cold, shockingly cold. Even in June, the Pacific north of Midway can suck the heat from your bones in minutes. Ensign George Gay bobs in his yellow Mae West, one arm hooked through a piece of floating wreckage from his Devastator. 10 yards away, 19-year-old Sparks, Robert Huntington, treads water desperately, his flight helmet gone, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes darting between the burning horizon and the silver shapes diving toward them. Above, the Japanese Zeros smell blood. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya, leading the Combat Air Patrol, banks his Mitsubishi A6M0 sharply and signals the others. Strafing run, low pass. His voice crackles over the radio with the casual confidence of men who have ruled these skies for 6 months. To the Japanese pilots, this is not combat anymore. It is target practice. 2 lone Americans floating like ducks in a pond. The carriers below are secure. The American torpedo attack has been slaughtered. 14 of Torpedo 8's 15 planes shot down in minutes. Only these 2 survivors remain, and the Zeros intend to finish the job. The first Zero screams in at wave-top height. Its 7.7mm nose guns chatter. Bullets whip the surface into froth around Gay. He ducks under for a heartbeat, lungs burning, then surfaces again, gasping. A second Zero follows, cannons thumping. Shell splashes erupt like miniature geysers. One round clips Sparks' life vest, tearing a long gash, but somehow missing flesh. The young radio man shouts something incoherent, half curse, half prayer, as he kicks harder, trying to keep his head above the churn. You can almost feel the terror in their chests, the helplessness, the roar of those radial engines growing louder with every pass, the bright muzzle flashes, the knowledge that death is coming in neat, disciplined lines from men who have done this before at Pearl Harbor, at Wake, at Coral Sea. Gay and Sparks are not heroes in this moment. They are simply 2 young men who do not want to die alone in the middle of the ocean. But something is happening that no one below can see. High above the melee, 18,000 feet up, hidden in the glare of the midday sun, Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McCluskey, Jr. leads 37 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from the USS Enterprise. McCluskey, a tough, no-nonsense Annapolis man with a reputation for ice-cold decisions, has been searching for nearly 2 hours. His fuel is critically low. His pilots are exhausted. The Japanese fleet should be right here, but the ocean below looks empty except for a lone destroyer trailing a long white wake. Then McCluskey spots it, that thin, arrow-straight wake, a destroyer moving at high speed, as if rushing to rejoin the main body after chasing submarines or screening for the carriers.
In one brilliant flash of intuition, McCluskey makes the call that will change history. Follow that destroyer. It will lead us to the carriers. The Dauntlesses bank and follow. As they climb into position, the Japanese Zeros are still fixated on the two men in the water. Every fighter pilot within 20 miles has heard the calls. American survivors down. Request permission to finish them. Pride and bloodlust pull them lower and lower. Formation discipline breaks. Instead of maintaining high-altitude combat patrol to guard against exactly this kind of threat, the Zeros circle and dive repeatedly, their guns chewing the sea around Gay and Sparks. Some pilots even roll inverted for better angles, laughing over the radio as the Americans flinch and dive beneath the bullets. Sparks fires his .38 revolver wildly at one passing plane, futile, ridiculous, but it makes him feel alive for 1 second longer. Gay shouts encouragement across the water. "Keep moving, kid. Don't give them a stationary target." Minutes tick by, precious, irreplaceable minutes. The Zeros stay low. Their eyes stay glued to the floating men. Their altitude readings drop from 15,000 to 10,000 to 5,000 feet. They are no longer guarding the sky. At that exact moment, McCluskey's formation reaches the perfect attack position, 17,000 feet above the Japanese carriers. The Dauntlesses slide back their canopies, the cold wind whipping through their cockpits. They armed their 1,000-pound bombs. Below them, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy steams in perfect formation. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu. Flight decks crowded with planes being rearmed for a second strike on Midway. Fuel hoses snaking everywhere. No one looking up. McCluskey's voice comes calm and steady over the radio. "Target the carriers. Dive when ready. Good hunting." The first Dauntless rolls inverted and pushes over into its screaming 70-degree dive. Then another. Then 10 more. The sky fills with the terrifying whistle of air brakes and the howl of engines in full power dive. Down below, the Japanese lookouts finally spot the threat, but it is already too late. The Zeros that should have been there to intercept are still buzzing the water like angry hornets, chasing two insignificant Americans who refuse to die quickly. In the water, Gay and Sparks hear the new sound, a deeper, more terrible roar than anything they have experienced that morning. They look up through stinging salt spray and see black specks plunging from the heavens like avenging angels. Sparks's eyes widen in disbelief. My God, look at them come! The mistake that sent Torpedo 8 to its near destruction has, in one cruel twist of fate, pulled the Japanese fighter screen exactly where it should never have been, low, distracted, and out of position. And now, the sky above belongs completely to Wade McCluskey's Dauntlesses.
The first Dauntless tips over at 17,000 feet. The sound is unearthly, a high, piercing whistle that grows into a full-throated scream as the dive brakes bite the air. Lieutenant Clarence Earl Dickinson leads the way, his SBD plunging straight down toward the carrier Kaga like a falling sword. The G-forces slam him back into his seat. The ocean rushes up. The Japanese fleet, caught completely flat-footed, begins to react, but their anti-aircraft guns are still tracking low, expecting more torpedo planes. In the water, Ensign George Gay and his wounded radioman, Aviation Radioman 3rd Class Robert K. Huntington, Sparks, watch in frozen awe. Gay's eyes sting from salt and exhaustion. Huntington, bleeding from multiple wounds, clings to a piece of wreckage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Bullets still churn the sea around them, but the Zeros are suddenly pulling up, their pilots shouting frantic warnings over the radio as black specks streak out of the sun. "Jesus Christ," Gay mutters, half prayer, half disbelief. "They're diving right on top of them." The first bomb hits Kaga square on the flight deck amidships. The 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb punches through the wooden planking, through stacked torpedoes and fueled aircraft, and detonates deep inside the hangar. A secondary explosion rips outward in a blooming fireball that engulfs planes, fuel lines, and ordnance. Black smoke billows skyward in an instant. Sailors on the deck are vaporized or flung overboard like rag dolls. The proud carrier, just minutes earlier preparing to launch its own strike, begins to burn uncontrollably. McCluskey's pilots do not miss. Dive after dive, the SBD Dauntlesses scream down in disciplined waves. Lieutenant Richard Best and his section target the Akagi. Their bombs strike home, one glancing the edge of the bridge, another slamming into the flight deck near the island. The Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, shudders as flames race across her deck, igniting the aircraft that had been warming up for the second wave against Midway. Nagumo himself is forced to flee his burning bridge, the Empire's carefully orchestrated plan unraveling in real time. Soryu takes 3 hits in rapid succession. Her crew, still celebrating the slaughter of the American torpedo planes, has no time to react. Bombs tear through her decks, detonating aviation gasoline and torpedoes in a chain reaction that turns the carrier into a floating inferno within seconds. 6 minutes. That is all it takes. 6 minutes for 37 American dive bombers, most of them from the Enterprise, with others from the Yorktown joining the chaos, to deliver what years of planning and thousands of lives could not. 3 Japanese fleet carriers, Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu, mortally wounded and burning beyond salvation, their flight decks twisted into scrap, their hangars roaring with secondary explosions, thousands of Japanese sailors and airmen trapped below decks or leaping into the sea. High above, McCluskey circles, his own plane now low on fuel, watching the Japanese fleet dissolve into panic. Smoke columns rise like funeral pyres. Japanese destroyers race in circles, some firing wildly at phantoms. The once invincible Kido Butai, the mobile striking force that had terrorized the Pacific, is crippled in a single devastating stroke. Down in the water, Gay and Huntington drift among the growing debris. Huntington's strength is fading fast. Blood clouds the water around him. He manages a weak smile toward his pilot. We did it, sir?" His voice is barely audible over the distant thunder of explosions. Gay nods, throat tight. "Yeah, kid, we bought them the time. But the cost weighs heavy. Of Torpedo Squadron 8's 30 men who flew that morning, only George Gay will survive the day. The rest, brave young men who pressed home a hopeless attack, lie in the Pacific with their shattered devastators. Their sacrifice was not in vain. Their hopeless low-level runs had forced the Japanese carriers to launch and recover fighters repeatedly, delaying their own strike, keeping the Zeros low and distracted at the precise moment the Dauntlesses arrived overhead. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol, so focused on finishing off 2 helpless Americans, had abandoned the high sky. The fatal distraction had worked, born from a young radioman's confused radio call, a pilot's trust, and raw, desperate courage. Yet the battle is not over. Far to the north, the 4th Japanese carrier, Hiryu, remains untouched and dangerous. Admiral Nagumo's surviving staff scramble to launch a counterstrike. The American carriers are still out there, vulnerable. Gay looks up at the pillars of smoke rising thousands of feet into the sky and whispers to the burning horizon, "Now it's our turn to run." But for one brief, miraculous window, the impossible had happened. A 19-year-old's mistake in the chaos of battle, combined with the selfless sacrifice of Torpedo 8, had cleared the path for the most decisive aerial attack in naval history. The Pacific Fleet, indeed the entire Allied cause in the Pacific, had been saved by a handful of dying men and one floating distraction no one could have planned. The smoke from the 3 dying carriers still clawed at the sky like black fingers when the sea stirred with new fury. Far to the north, the Soryu, untouched, proud, and now the last hope of the Kido Butai, turned into the wind. Captain Tomeo Kaku and Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi knew time was bleeding away. While their sister ships burned behind them, they launched everything they had left. 18 Aichi 3DA dive bombers, VALs, escorted by 6 Zeros. Their target, the American carrier their scouts had spotted earlier, the Yorktown. In the water, George Gay watched the Japanese formation climb and wheel northward. His lips cracked from salt as he muttered, "They're going after our boys. God help them." Huntington's breathing had grown shallow, each gasp a wet rattle. "Sir, did we really slow them down?" "Yeah, Sparks," Gay said, forcing a grin he didn't feel. "You and the boys bought us those 6 minutes. Now it's their turn to pay." Hours crawled under the merciless sun. Gay kept talking about football in Texas, about bad Navy coffee, about anything to keep Huntington conscious. Japanese destroyers still crisscrossed the area, their crews shouting and firing at shadows. Gay pressed himself lower into the oil slick, using his seat cushion as camouflage, praying they wouldn't be spotted. Mid-afternoon, the horizon flashed again. The first wave from Soryu found the Yorktown. American Wildcat fighters and anti-aircraft gunners tore into them, but 3 bombs still punched home. One exploded on the flight deck, another tore through the stack, knocking out most of her boilers. Smoke poured from her proud carrier as she slowed, dead in the water for the first time. Her crew swarmed like ants, fighting fires, shoring up bulkheads, refusing to let her die. But Soryu wasn't finished. Barely an hour later, a second wave, 10 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers with 6 more Zeros arrived. To the Japanese pilot's astonishment, the Yorktown looked almost operational again, her damage control teams having worked miracles. They mistook her for a second, undamaged carrier and pressed the attack with fanatical courage. 2 torpedoes slammed into her port side amidships, ripping open a massive gash. The Yorktown heeled sharply to port, listing 23 degrees, all power lost. Sailors slid across tilting decks as water roared in. Captain Elliot Buckmaster gave the order to abandon ship. Life rafts and nets went over the side as hundreds of men slid into the sea, many wounded, all exhausted. High above, the surviving American pilots circled, low on fuel, watching their carrier burn. Meanwhile, American search planes had finally located the Soryu. Late in the afternoon, a scratch force of Dauntlesses, 11 from the Enterprise and 14 from the Yorktown's bombing 3, roared in under Lieutenant Gallagher's command. The Soryu twisted and turned at full speed, her anti-aircraft guns hammering the sky, but the Dauntlesses came screaming down anyway. 4 1,000-pound bombs found their mark. One smashed the forward elevator, hurling it against the island superstructure. Others tore gaping holes in the flight deck, igniting fueled aircraft and aviation gasoline in a roaring inferno. Flames raced through the hangar, fed by the wind of her desperate maneuvers. Within minutes, Soryu was a floating torch, her once elegant lines twisted and black. Back in the water, night fell. Gay finally risked inflating his tiny life raft. He pulled Huntington aboard as best he could, the wounded radio man now barely responsive. They drifted in darkness, lit only by the distant orange glow of burning ships. 3 Japanese carriers still raging, and now a 4th joining them, plus the crippled Yorktown somewhere to the east. Dawn on June 5th brought no immediate rescue. Gay's throat was raw, his skin blistered raw. Huntington whispered once more, voice like dry leaves. "We did it. Didn't we, sir?" Gay squeezed his shoulder.
Yeah, kid, we did. By late morning, the Soryu was dead in the water, her engines silenced by uncontrollable fires. At 03:15, the order came to abandon ship. Rear Admiral Yamaguchi and Captain Kaku chose to remain aboard with hundreds of their men, going down with their carrier in the old samurai tradition. Japanese destroyers fired torpedoes into the blazing wreck to hasten her end. Soryu slipped beneath the waves around 9 a.m. on June 5th, taking 389 souls with her. The Kido Butai, the old invincible striking force that had smashed Pearl Harbor, was no more. 4 fleet carriers gone in 2 days. The Japanese invasion of Midway was canceled. Admiral Yamamoto's grand plan lay in ruins. But the price was not yet fully paid. On June 6th, while salvage crews from the destroyer Hammond worked desperately alongside the listing Yorktown, pumping, shoring up, trying to get her under tow, the Japanese submarine I-168 slipped through the destroyer screen like a ghost. At close range, it fired 4 torpedoes. One sliced the Hammond in half. The destroyer sank in minutes, her depth charges exploding underwater and killing many of her own crew in the water. 2 more torpedoes slammed into the Yorktown's starboard side. The great carrier shuddered, rolled further, and though she clung stubbornly to life through the night, she finally capsized and sank on the morning of June 7th. Gay and Huntington were still drifting when a PBY Catalina's drone finally cut through the sky. Gay fired his last flare. Rough hands